Hi, my name is Anna Mayers, and today I will be presenting on the topic of police brutality, specifically police officers' use of excessive force on the Black community. In the 1600s, when they were forcibly brought to America in the slave trade, Black people have been oppressed. This oppression continued throughout the 1800s and 1900s in the forms of lynching and segregation. In 1963, Martin Luther King Jr., the leader of the Civil Rights Movement from 1954 until 1968, wrote his letter from Birmingham jail while he was in prison for conducting a civil rights protest. In the letter, King expressed his frustration with segregation and having to wait more than 340 years for his God-given rights. In 2019, although there is no lynching, slavery, or segregation, the system of oppression has transformed into the form of police brutality, a racist policing epidemic in the United States. As reported by Mapping Police Violence, 1,147 people died at the hands of police in 2017, and officers were only charged with a crime in 13 of these cases. Black people were 25% of those killed, despite accounting for just 13% of the total population. The large numbers of Black citizens being killed by police officers led me to my research question: what should be done to minimize the effects of police brutality in the United States? After researching this topic through multiple lenses, I have concluded that it is imperative that police officers be held accountable for using excessive force against Black citizens. Some police officers have a racial bias towards Black people, which is why they are so quick to use fatal force, even in unthreatening situations. Mark Lamont Hill, the Steve Charles Professor of Media Studies and Solutions at Temple University, discusses the case of Michael Brown, an unarmed Black 18-year-old who was shot and killed by white police officer Darren Wilson. Brown's death sparked the debate over Wilson's reasoning for using excessive force. Hill writes, quote, "Even if Darren Wilson, held no personal racial animus, he nonetheless approached Michael Brown carrying a particular set of assumptions." Malcolm D. Holmes, a former professor of sociology at the University of Wyoming, and Brad W. Smith, a professor of criminal justice at Wayne State University, add on to Hill's ideas about racial bias. They acknowledge that racial biases often play a role in cases where officers use excessive force. They write that the police, quote, "may employ severe forms of force in response to situations in which they perceive minority citizens as personal threats." Hill, Holmes, and Smith help to emphasize the point that police officers will often use excessive force because of a racial bias, not because they were in a life-threatening situation. When doing normal activities, Black people must be cautious in their everyday lives to avoid violent encounters with the police. On November 22, 2014, Cleveland, Ohio police officer Timothy Loman shot and killed 12-year-old Tamir Rice, a Black boy, when he mistook his toy gun for a real one. Officer Loman was not charged for this shooting. In this case, the officer used unnecessary force on a child who was only playing with a toy instead of trying to de-escalate or investigate the situation. Ijoma Oluo, author of the acclaimed So You Want to Talk About Race, offers her insight on the issue of police brutality and race as she writes about the fear that she has when driving. She writes that when she sees the lights of a police car go on, her pulse rises and she prays that she, quote, "won't make the wrong moves or say the wrong things." While white people can drive without worry or fear of the police, Black people never get that sense of ease. Clint Smith, a writer, poet, and scholar whose research focuses on race and society, elaborates on the points made by Oluo. He speaks on the lessons his parents taught him growing up, one of which being when his father told him he could not act the same as his white friends because they were shooting water guns in the dark one night. Smith affirms that him and his Black friends had been inundated with messages like these their entire lives, just so that their parents could see them come home at night. Throughout history, the rights of Black people have been restricted in different ways. In 1963, singer-songwriter Bob Dylan asked, "How many years can some people exist before they're allowed to be free?" In this verse of Blowin' in the Wind, an anthem of the civil rights movement, Dylan is referencing the mistreatment of Black people throughout history. After existing in the United States for hundreds of years, they still face racial profiling, discrimination, and oppression. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke out about this oppression in his letter from Birmingham jail, where he expressed his frustration with segregation and having to wait more than 340 years for his God-given rights. After hearing the word wait so many times, he reasons, quote, "perhaps it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say wait. Wait has almost always meant never." In the 21st century, the Black community feels these stinging darts in the form of police brutality. David G. Emmerich, associate professor of sociology at the University of Connecticut, makes a different comparison as he labels the deaths of Eric Garner, Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, and others as modern-day lynchings. He writes that police killings, quote, "serve today in much the same way that they did in the past, as a way to emphasize minorities placed in a racialized social system." Although police officers may use excessive force when it is unnecessary, Some would argue that the effects of police brutality can be minimized by the people officers interact with, not the officers. Sunil Dutta, a 17-year veteran police officer in Los Angeles, claims that it is not the police officer's fault, it is the people they stop who are at fault in cases of violence. Dutta argues that when cops do have to use force, often with tragic results, it is not the officer's fault because they are protecting themselves or the public. He asserts, quote, "If you don't want to get shot, just do what I tell you." He also points out that each traffic stop is a potentially dangerous encounter for him, even though it might just be a simple stop for the person he is pulling over. Police officers do have a dangerous job. However, it is not the people they stop who are at fault in cases of violence. When an officer pulls someone over, it is not illegal to argue with them or even verbally abuse them, according to Nick Wing, senior reporter at the Huffington Post. If someone feels as if their rights are being violated, they should be able to argue with the officer without any force having to be used. Campaign Zero, a police reform campaign run by activists such as Brittany Packnett, Samuel Sinyawi, and DeRay McKesson, propose an all-civilian oversight structure that consists of two groups, a police commission and a civilian complaints office. The implication to this solution is that the police commission would be able to determine policies for a police department, hold public disciplinary hearings, discipline police officers, and more. As for the civilian complaints office, Campaign Zero proposes that it would investigate all complaints against police, send investigators to the scene of police shootings, be allowed to interrogate officers after an incident of deadly force, access crime scenes, and subpoena witnesses. Sean King, a civil rights activist and founder of Real Justice PAC, explains a limitation to this system, as he considers the changes will not be easy. He writes, quote, "Police will fight them tooth and nail. However, this system would be in everyone's best interest, as it would allow for corrupt officers to be held accountable and removed from their position." Sean King offers a solution of his own, as he proposes that all police officers should be required to take racial bias tests. A limitation to this solution, he explains, is that officers could try to lie in the tests. However, some tests can be created in ways that take dishonesty into account. The implications, he explains, would be based on the results of the test. Any officer who completely fails could be removed from active duty to work their way back up. Officers who receive middle grades could be put on probation and an extensive training schedule. Whenever an officer uses excessive force, it can never be assumed that the officer was unbiased. No matter how difficult it may be, action must be taken to put an end to the shootings of black bodies at the hands of law enforcement, the very people whose job it is to keep communities safe. In the words of Martin Luther King Jr., "Justice too long delayed is justice denied." Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, thanks. Okay, so the first of two questions. What information did you need that you weren't able to find or locate, and how'd you go about trying to find it?
So information that I needed was a current statistics for police brutality. For example, for the year 2018, I really tried to find these statistics, but because they're so in-depth, I was not able to find a current one. But Mapping Police Violence is the source I use for my statistics, and the most recent data they had was for 2017. So I did try to find the data for 2018, but it was just not available. So the 2017 data, although it was a few years outdated, I was still able to use it as relevant information because it was the most up-to-date information on the topic. For example, when I said that police killed 1,147 people in that year, and officers were only charged with the crime, in 13 of those cases really helped to emphasize my point that officers must be held accountable, and they usually are not.
Okay, thanks. So with the second question, what advice would you give or would you have for other researchers doing this topic?
So the advice that I would have is to familiarize yourself with modern day cases of police brutality. A lot of the cases that I used came from Mark Lamont Hill's book, Nobody, where he goes in depth on the cases of Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, and Eric Garner. And so I would familiarize yourself with these cases and also know the statistics. Like I said, I use Mapping Police Violence for my statistics. And overall advice, I would say research and look through scholarly sources before you narrow down your topic. My topic was more broad and focused on the issue as a whole, but I would recommend to look through your sources and focus on what topics specifically you were going to research. For example, should police officers have body cameras or something like that.
Okay, thanks.